So rules updates for Chaos Space Marines today. Chosen get a Power Fist back, a small toughness boost for the Dark Apostle, and pretty much all the good stuff remained completely intact, even the things that maybe they weren't quite intending in the codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos Space Marines, and we're going to just go through Games Workshop's latest update to the rules. This is the FAQ and Errata that they publish a few weeks after the codex comes out, which usually changes a few things and just makes sure everything is functioning the way that it's intended. This isn't the update that they usually provide any sort of balance changes, though sometimes it can impact on an army's strength, but broadly speaking it does generally seem to be very good news for Chaos in this update. Pretty much all of their strongest stuff remained completely intact, a couple of useful little buffs to some units, a couple of clarifications on exactly how rules work, though I must admit there's rather a surprising amount that they didn't make a ruling on either way, that I think that they might have chosen to just to provide a little bit more clarification if nothing else. First up, I think perhaps the most interesting change that they've made is that the war gear for Chosen has been slightly updated and basically made the unit flat stronger by a little bit. The Chaos Space Marine Codex had quite a lot of weird things that they'd done with the war gear of various different units, but perhaps one of the single weirdest decisions was that the Chosen kit comes with a Power Fist, but they only have the option to take accursed weapons. On the very similar Terminators, they have the option to take accursed weapons across most of the squad, and the Power Fist rules are distinct to give them a bit more of a punch against the tank units if you decide to take them for 5 points. It did seem a bit odd that the Chosen could not have any sort of access to Power Fists even when one comes in the box, and Games Workshop does seem to agree with that, as they've now given the option for one Chosen per 5 of them to take a Power Fist instead of their accursed weapon. I would bear in mind that it's still just the one Power Fist per 5, so only going to be 2 out of the squad even if you take them at maximum, so I'm afraid you still can't be running around with Chosen on foot with Power Fists rather than the accursed weapons with the extra attack, strength 5 and AP 3. In general though, I think that the Power Fist is well worth the upgrade. Currently they haven't actually updated the points cost on the Chosen whatsoever yet, and I'm not sure if they're even going to bother. Basically that would mean that the Power Fist at the moment would be free for the unit to take, and they wouldn't have to pay the 5-point premium like the Terminators have to, basically making it a near auto-include. I think from the way that they've worded it, it has to be on a basic squad member, not the champion, sadly. It says one Chosen model per 5 can take this, not the Chosen champion, but still that's going to be 3 attacks with a very fighty weapon. I think if I were taking Chosen squads, I would take this, doubly so if they're Emperor's children maybe, as you get to ignore the modifier. Still though, with war gear in the codex, there's plenty that other Chaos players would have to desire. Jump Pack Lords became legends, which really wasn't a popular move. The Terminator options are still pretty weird and restricted, only a certain amount of Power Fists per 5, and there's a fair few bits and bobs people would prefer to go back to the old state of affairs. It seems that this is all Games Workshop is going to go for though. Otherwise, there's a bunch of other minor clarifications to different sections of the codex. First up, and perhaps the most meaningfully impactful one, is the Dark Apostle and the Dark Disciples. Currently the Dark Apostle has Toughness 4 as he's a Space Marine, and the Dark Disciples have Toughness 3 as their cultist, and it means that if you shoot at the units, then they're currently Toughness 3 until we kill one of the Disciples. It means that if you're firing out something that winds up wiping out the squad in one go, then you'll have basically been able to shoot at the Dark Disciple, never having to wound him on his Toughness of 4. Which did seem a bit inappropriate, seeing as he's by far the major model, and the other 2 guys are basically little hangers-on, who should be making him tougher with their extra wounds rather than weaker. The way that they've fixed that is changing the Dark Disciples to be Toughness 4 rather than Toughness 3. That removes any major issues, and you'll have things like bolters wounding on 4s again rather than wounding on 3s. That's more defensive buff there. Next up, there's a minor change to Stimulated by Pain, an Emperor's Children Warlord trait. This one is one that gives you an extra attack per each wound lost to a maximum of 3, though they lose those extra attacks if they heal up again, presumably they're not in as much pain anymore. This one had a slightly weird interaction where basically if you lost a whole ton of wounds, say if you lost 6 wounds on a Terminator Lord for example, then you healed all of them back up, you could actually wind up with less attacks than you started with, which doesn't really make much sense. They fixed this by saying that he can never have less attacks than he started with in the first place. Next up, there's an interaction between the Liber Hereticus and the Cursed Earth spell, clarifying whether or not that counts as amping up the range of the Cursed Earth aura, and they basically say no it doesn't. Liber Hereticus can make the psychic powers go off a little bit further away, and they've made the decision that Cursed Earth's aura isn't technically a range, so that area of effect remains at 6 inches. I think that's perhaps not the worst call in my opinion. It still remains a very, very powerful spell even at 6-inch range, as you can just chain back units to be fit into it and get the extra protection against enemies charging them. Still a very good spell, and the Liber Hereticus still remains great because it lets you cast an extra power as well, and increases the range on anything else that you cast. Finally, there's a small clarification to Index World Eaters, basically saying that Psykers can never be taken in World Eaters detachments, as they can't be given the Mark of Khorne. I really don't know whether that was rules as written legal before. It seemed like it was obviously implied that you couldn't before, but it seems that they thought that it was unclear enough for the need to close the loophole. I certainly hadn't seen anyone running World Eaters Psykers around, so perhaps didn't seem like the most necessary clarification ever. Otherwise though, I must admit there's really quite a lot of stuff that I half expected that they might fix or edit, but they haven't touched whatsoever. As mentioned before, there's plenty of other weird war gear things that we won't get into again. I'm sure Chaos players would have loved to have the Jump Pack Lord option come back, but it seems not to be, and that is indeed Legends. Next up, I was wondering whether or not they might address the Black Rune of Damnation. I honestly don't think that it was probably intended to give an entire Terminator squad -1 to wound all game long for 1 CP, and I was wondering whether or not they'd keep it, as it is pretty much the most auto-include thing in Codex Chaos Space Marines by a long way. My guess is that it wasn't intended, but because when taken as a whole, the Chaos Space Marine army isn't exactly dominating the meta right now, it's a fairly mid-tier faction, they've decided to leave that bit in place, as it doesn't seem to be too much for other armies to deal with, not in the context of the rest of the faction. I feel like if Chaos Space Marines had been ridiculously strong, then they probably would have altered it. Certainly good news for Chaos players though, as one of the strongest combos in the book remains unchanged. Next up, Forge World units still haven't been updated yet. My guess would be that they will get round to this, and hopefully not too far away, but currently a lot of the Forge World choices for Chaos Marines lack the right keywords to be included in their detachments. They might make some other superficial changes to the rules. It has varied a bit depending on the different codexes and how much love the Forge World choices got. Currently can't really play with them rules as written, though a lot of the time the basic keyword changes that they'll make to them does seem fairly obvious. I'm sure this will be coming in the not too distant future. Hopefully they don't take too long about it for anyone who wants to use their Dreadclaw drop pods or Chaos Leviathans. Next, I was wondering whether they might address the gamey sort of charge that you can do with the Master of Possession and sacrificing Terminators, only to resurrect them closer. I did talk about this in another video, as it feels like a bit of rules abuse, but quite powerful stuff. In theory, you could get a very short deep strike charge with Terminators by dropping them near a Master of Possession, casting 2 spells with a sacrifice rule to give you a very good chance of killing a Terminator, and then making the second cast the Pact of Flesh, allowing you to heal that injured Terminator back up, set a Terminator model up closer to the enemy, and potentially get you a really short deep strike charge, almost guaranteed with a CP reroll. Again, this one feels completely unintended. I think it does check out rules as written though. Maybe they just chose not to address it because overall it might not be quite as worth it, just compared with having the Terminators start on the board and using Pact of Flesh to heal them up normally. That spell's amazing just about wherever you use it, so maybe doing weird shenanigans with it to make a closer deep strike charge might just be not quite important enough for them to address. Next, the Black Legion Veilbreaker plate is a bit of an interesting case, as half of its rule does nothing at the moment. The main advantage is to teleport a Terminator character and 1 squad across the board, Necron Veil of Darkness style, and that is very powerful. But the other half of the relic means that it worsens AP by 1 when you shoot at the bearer, basically just double stacking with Armour of Contempt, and meaning that the Armour of Contempt rule does nothing effectively. This bit's completely redundant, but I guess maybe it's not super important to address, as overall the relic is very strong just for its primary teleport ability. Finally, I think it might have been useful to give some clarification on Rubric Marines and their icons, even if it is a negative. Currently in Codex Chaos Space Marines you can field Rubric Marines taken from their datasheet in Codex Thousand Suns. Those Rubric Marines can take an Icon of Flame, which basically is an Icon of Tzeentch pretty much, but because it's technically got a different name, you can't access the second part of the icon buff for it, say giving their Inferno Bolts or Warp Flamers extra AP. They don't get the icon keyword, and it isn't technically an Icon of Tzeentch. My guess is that they might just have left it how it is, just as it probably wasn't an intended interaction. Rubric Marines are already weirdly strong in Chaos Space Marines due to that Let the Galaxy Burn rule, meaning that their Warp Flamers get an extra 2 hits each, which is pretty mad on a good damage profile. I don't think that they really need the extra AP to be a solid unit already. But even if it's Games Workshop's intention that they don't get it, I do feel that they should probably clarify it, just to make sure that no one's confused and is claiming to get AP that they don't actually get. Overall though, a couple of really handy little buffs for Chaos Marines, a couple of questions answered, Most of the good rules and slightly janky combos untouched, which doesn't really hurt in a mid-tier army, though maybe at least answering a couple of these other last questions might have been useful. Let me know what you think though down in the comments below. Are your chosen itching to use some power fists, and how important do you think these other questions were to answer? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k stuff coming. I do tend to post new updates just about every day. We'll have plenty more for the Chaos Marines, there's a Chaos Terminators unit review coming soon, and we'll continue to look through the Legions and some of their strongest stuff. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. This is what allows me to keep the 40k Tactics videos coming quite so often, so feel free to check that out if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.